he actually was put to death. Like he actually died. The account on the cross is real, and what we see in the Gospels, like it's backed by medical science.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you learn and grow in your faith. This journey of faith is something you are on whether you like it or not, and you're either growing or shrinking in your faith every single day. But we want to be part of your growing in your faith. We want to be here to encourage you, to challenge you, and to occasionally entertain you a little bit, because ultimately, as much as the world would like to say it, we're not just a bunch of humorless goody two-shoes that sit and have no fun. So my name is Jesse Maher. I'll be your host, but we cannot do the Salty Pastor Podcast without some salty pastors, and I've got two of my favorites here, right now. Pastor Doug is saving up his energy for the big Easter celebration, so we've got equally great Pastor Harvey Friesen and Pastor Steve Botsford.
Hey.
Yeah, good to be with you guys today.
Well, we are approaching the whole point and purpose of our faith, aren't we, gentlemen? We are headed into Easter Sunday, and we've kind of been talking about on some of the other episodes, it's weird that we celebrate Jesus dying, right? You know, it's Thursday, tomorrow is Good Friday. Why we celebrate somebody's death, and that feels weird, but it's ultimately because he didn't stay dead, right? He comes back, and that's the whole point. If he just died, or if he didn't die at all, then our faith has no reason, right? There's no redemption from that act. So he had to die, and that's why we celebrate it, even though it seems very contradictory.
Well, and that's why we call it Resurrection Sunday. I mean, it's all about the resurrection. It's the notion of God stamped his his handprint on eternity by saying, I will do the one thing that all of you humans are bound by, and that is captive to death. You know, what does everybody have in common? Everyone will go to a grave. And so Christ resurrected, and so we celebrate resurrection. And one of the things I think we have to be careful with in our current day and age as well is everything of the biblical faith is being co-opted, right? They're taking Christmas and making it into merchandising. I mean, you can go on and on and on, and the one thing as well is Easter, right? And so Easter is about one thing, resurrection. Love that it's beautiful in spring. I mean, we had a beautiful day, here going on today. I mean, all those kinds of beautiful things. But ultimately, it's not just about, new dresses and pretty sunny starting to come around. This is God is the author and perfecter of our faith, and he stamped it with the resurrection, which means God is a God of life, not a God of death. We celebrate a culture of life in the church, not a culture of death in the church.
Absolutely.
And there was a death that actually took it to that place. He defeated death, which is why we celebrate life.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the resurrection. On Tuesday, Pastor Doug dove into some biblical verses about why the resurrection was important. But I kind of want to dive into, talk to me a little bit about how we know that he actually did resurrect. Like, do we have proof of that, Steve? Like, is that a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, like, it's not this mythical story that, like, what we get from a lot
Hercules or these different mythologies.
And so, what we have is Jesus being recorded in history as a real person. And this isn't just in the four Gospels. Like, this is outside of the Bible. A guy named Josephus, who was a Jew at that time, he did a lot of recording for the Roman war against Jerusalem and the Jews. And he records Jesus being a real person, someone that was known as the Christ, is the way I believe that they put it. And so we have Jesus actually being a real person. And so he existed for real.
Go, Steve. Keep going. Yeah, so he existed. And Josephus does a beautiful thing for us in that here you have an external outside witness who says not only did he exist, he was also known as this. So it wasn't like some mythology that was thought up later on to kind of create a story where we do something cool
around
in
a
the
guy
church.
That happened to exist. Okay.
So what we know is history tells us that we know he was a man and we know he was a rabbi. He was a teacher. Okay, those are two very important things to understand. Because a lot of people today would like to just myth everything, right? Santa Claus, Jesus, the bunny rabbits, the whatevers. No, we serve a risen Lord. So you're asking the important question about resurrection.
Yeah.
What else, Steve?
Yeah. So that was number one. He was a real person. The next thing is, like, he actually was put to death. Like he actually died. The account on the cross is real, and what we see in the Gospels, like that is, it's backed by medical science. Like when it says that he was stabbed and both blood and water came out, that's actually indicates a condition that he had of heart failure, and that's being up on the cross. At some point, like his like the heart, or around the heart, filled with blood, his lungs filled with water, and as he's stabbed by the spear with these from these Roman guards, like both blood and water come out. And I first heard about that from Lee Strobel's book, Case for Christ. And like he went and he's an atheist. He went and investigated these things, trying to prove Christianity wrong. And by the end of it, he's like, I can't. So he interviews actual medical doctors.
Right. Well, and it stands up. This is a great thing about our faith. It's a testable faith, and it stands up to scrutiny, right? And a lot of people don't do that. And one of the great mistakes that people make is that they take the account of somebody else and they hear the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh hand story of it all, as opposed to actually studying it and looking at it themselves. So it stands up to medical So let's say it this way: historical witness stands up to the medical testimony, and then you look into it as well. You realize that historically crucifixion did happen. You understand that there were those places outside of the old city of Jerusalem where crucifixions happened regularly. We saw those a few weeks ago.
We did. We were Pastor Harv was nice enough to be kind of our master guide on our trip to Israel, and he took us to some really cool places. Even the Israeli museum has a whole section devoted to Jesus, and why would they put a section devoted to a man that didn't exist, right? Like,
but exactly. I mean, yeah, these are empirical scientists, historical, archaeological people, and there's a really cool thing to kind of to Steve's point too, and that is for this to be a hoax, the entire Roman Empire had to be in on the hoax. And not only be in on the hoax, got to remember this, Christianity actually was the thing that helped take down the Roman Empire, right? So if it was a hoax, it took down the entire Roman Empire, something that none of the others could do. And how do we know this? We saw in the Israel Museum the Pontius Pilate stone. And what was the Pontius? Why is this so important? Is that Pontius, we know Herod, we saw Herod's temple.
Sarcophagus is there now.
Sarcophagus is there right across from Jesus's. Ironically, It sat right there. That was kind of a wow moment, wasn't it? There, we were in the Israel Museum there in Jerusalem, and you have the sarcophagus, the box they found at Herod's place of burial that was where he was found in. So we know he was real, but what we realize, here's one of the cool things about archaeology and history, is that an underling, a person that's job was to oversee the Antonia fortress there in Jerusalem, was a guy named Pontius Pilate. They found a rock with his name on it, engraved on there in Caesarea Maritima, and it's in the Israel Museum. So here's what it establishes. It establishes that the testament that we're going to read, that's part of our whole witness of Easter Sunday, is the guy that washed his hands of the death of Christ, the guy that offered them, you can let him go free if you want to, and the crowd yelled, give us Barabbas, was a guy named Pontius Pilate. He washed his hands. His wife had a dream about this guy and said, don't have anything to do with him. And then they sent him off to be crucified. So there is so much witness to this. People need to know that.
Now, Steve, my assumption is that I've heard, even when we were in Israel, one of the things that the other faiths believe is that, oh yeah, Jesus was a real guy, but he didn't actually die up there, or he didn't come back. Talk to me about that. Like, could the Roman guards have missed a little bit, and maybe he did just play dead long enough to be taken down, and then he ran off into the sunset?
Yeah, have you ever tried to hold your breath that long?
No, I have not. I know I can't do it. But,
he faked it.
But I've heard that as a thing of.
I believe it's called swoon theory. Like he was asleep or passed out, fainted for a bit, and then he came to, and he's like, oh, hey, I'm good. You know?
I mean, I got stabbed in the side, and I was bleeding
cartoon
water.
Jesus, right? Yeah, and he came back.
No, I mean, but the reality is these guys were professionals at their job, and if they don't do their job right, then they get the consequences for it. And so there's very little room for error in that, and really that argument falls pretty flat on its face.
Yeah. Well, and those guys' lives were on the line for it. I mean, if they actually didn't guard that and it was broken, and remember there was a seal put on there like that, they lost their lives.
Once he was in the tomb.
Yeah. Okay. They lost their lives. mean, the Roman guards, this was no play around. It's no Hollywood, Disney-esque thing. They lose their lives if they don't do their job. It's that simple. Bring in the next two guys.
Right.
Well, and that's the not beauty, but that's like the technical side of crucifixion. It's you're literally suffocating, like with each breath, and to get another breath, you got to lift yourself up, and then you let that one go, and it hurts even more coming down, and your lungs eventually just like fill with that fluid. And so they knew, like, okay, we just got to break these guys' legs. These two on the sides that are still alive, we just have to break their legs. They'll be done here in a bit. But this guy in the middle, he's already gone. But we'll just jab him real quick to make sure, or to finish it off, you know. So they knew what they were doing.
Well, and it could last hours upon hours depending upon this person's strength. So we really think about it without, going too far past PG. I mean, people who've seen the Passion of the Christ. I mean, literally, it was people, they would push themselves up off of that spike in their legs, right, to be able to catch a breath. You died of suffocation. Think about how wretched the notion of that kind of a torture it would be. We're gonna watch you push yourself up and then die when you finally can't just push yourself up anymore. And then the only mercy given is we'll break his legs. He can't push himself up anymore. And you got to remember too, when they put you up like that, you're hanging down. What happens to your shoulders? They come out of the joints. They dislocate, right? Because you can't hold it together anymore. We talk about holding it together. That's kind of a reference to the crucifixion. You can't hold it together. That's why you end up dying. Big deal.
Any other thoughts you had, Pastor, about?
The last couple is just that, like, he was buried. He went into a tomb, and by the end of it, that tomb was empty. Like, if he was still in that tomb, that would have been the first place those Jewish leaders would have gone and said, like, hey, actually, we'll roll the stone away. Here's the body. You guys can just be done with your whole, like, he's risen thing.
Right. And this is very important sociologically, too, because why would the Jewish leaders not want this myth, this stupidity, this sect, if you will, to perpetuate? They were losing their sons and daughters to it. Remember, Jesus had a following. He had the 3, Peter, James, and John. He had the 12. He had the 70. He had the 120. He had the 500. I mean, he fed the 5,000, and that would have been counting the men, right? So you extrapolate that out. We're talking about 20-some thousand people. We were there on the Mount of Beatitudes a couple weeks ago. You see that area, and you go, wow, that's a big hillside.
It's a big hillside.
He would have had an amphitheater right there, and all those people got that, and he did these miraculous things. Think about the alternative for a second, right? We live in a marketing world, right? We're always looking for a better deal with a better product with a better price and a better location, right? From a religious standpoint, Jesus blows up the Jewish franchise. He blows it up, right? You guys talk about great things. He heals people. He brings them back from the dead. He teaches compassion. You teach rules. You smack my fingers for not washing my hands beforehand. His disciples have the freedom. They don't even have to wash their hands. Remember, he's criticized. His disciples are criticized. Don't wash his hands. So you have this set of Jews who've got this innate desire, kill the guy, get this over with. I mean, Steve, speak to Gamaliel for just a second. After all this happened, let's fast forward the story. What happens in Acts 5 there?
Yeah, so at this point, Peter is brought before the Sanhedrin. It's kind of like, hey, stop preaching. Just stop it.
He's dead. It's over.
And so they get together and they have this time. And Gamaliel, he says this to the people. In chapter 5 of Acts, verse 38, it says, so in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men, talking about the disciples, and let them alone. For if this plan is the undertaking of man, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God. So they took his advice. And so he's saying, like, hey guys, like, if this isn't real, if like they actually stole the body, it'll fizzle out.
Yeah.
Well, because there's no point in them keeping the ruse going, right? Like they start getting persecuted. No one gets a happy ending in this. So for them to go that long in their lives and never go, you know what? Actually, I lied. We stole the body one night, and just don't kill me. I'll stop doing the thing, right? But no, there's no benefit for them to continue this lie throughout their whole life.
So let's look at it for a second. So Steve's given historical witness on 2 levels, and then come along with medical witness to testify to it. Then come along with historical witness as it relates to Christianity thrived after that. even the lead teacher. Who Bible pop quiz, right? So who was Gamaliel's prize student?
Paul,
The Apostle
otherwise
Paul.
known as Saul, yeah.
Known as Saul. He was the prize student. So this was the Harvard of rabbis who stands up and says, if it's not from God, it'll fizzle. If it's from God, you can be fighting God on this. So he gets proved out. He gets proven out wrong. So, but let's think about the practical sociological witness to it for a second. Here's the sociology. If the Romans had the body, because we still have to answer the question, what happened to that body? Because you said there was an empty tomb. Mary Magdalene goes in there and goes, what? And her first thought, and this is a very important part of the biblical witness, her first thought was someone stole the body.
Yeah, what have you done with my
What have you done with my Lord? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because she was there compassionately broken, hurting. The Savior, was killed. So she's there. There's no body. If the Romans had the body, think about all the civil unrest that happened. The great goal, you guys know what the Apostle Paul was sent to Rome over. His accusation, his crime was he started a riot. You've been in the small parts of the little city of Jerusalem there in the old city. You start a riot in there, people are getting run over, trampled, killed, 100%. Hitting their heads on blocks, broken
no
skulls,
space. No
zero
space.
space. I mean, it's suffocation. It is a death chamber if there's a riot. Okay? So what was the Roman number one goal of the Roman Praetoria? Keep the peace at all costs, and they were crackheads to get that done. So here you have the entire world shifting, in the Roman world shifting, and they could have said, shut up, here's the body, get over this. Are you kidding me? Will you people let this die? Pontius Pilate had a reason for that to happen. Herod had a reason for that. Herod Antipas, all these people had a reason to say, shut up. They never did that. They never produced a body. Who's the next people could have had the body? The Jews would have had the body. Well, if the Jews had the body, you say, well, okay, they kept that going. And you would say, well, because they kept it and this will die out. Their children were fleeing Judaism and following this Jesus because their religious model of don't was done over with by, here comes this Savior who preaches life and life everlasting and hope and eternity and the goodness of God. All the kids were flocking to it. You have to remember this, when Jews' children would take him on as a Messiah, they literally would have a death ceremony for their kid. And the phrase, you're dead to me, comes from from that period. If the Jews had the body, they would have gone to their own children and said, think about if your children, Steve, would follow after some crazy thing, you would look at them and go, here's the proof. Are you kidding me? Stop this.
Yeah.
They didn't produce the body.
Right.
So the Romans didn't produce it. Jews didn't produce it. Well, then you're only left with the Christians had it. So the Christians had the body, and go to your point, Jesse. They had this body. The ruse continues, and they take, and does it get them like a nice beachfront property somewhere on the Red Sea?
They get no benefits in this
Zero.
process as far as
they get
worldly
worse.
benefits.
Yeah, we have Roman historians who tell us that 270,000 Christians died as martyrs, persecuted by being dipped in tar, and they lit the roads of Rome.
Nero, right? Was
Yeah,
doing
exactly.
That? Yeah.
So all this happens because they're believing a lie. And so my question would be, what lie would someone be willing to believe to give their entire life over? I mean, any of us, is there any lie we go, yeah, I'll die for that lie? I mean, we can't even get each other to go to a restaurant that doesn't have a good review more than 3 and above on Yelp, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm not going. You're going to die. No, well, I know you won't go there and eat with me and my favorite Mexican place over there on Fairview and all like that, Steve. But I want you to die for a lie with me. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm in. Yeah, it's all good. Monique's up for it. She said it's cool. Seriously. So we have historical witness times two. We have medical witness. We have, again, follow-up historical. And then we have sociological. And that is, we have to believe that all of Christianity is built on a lie because they had the body. No one produced a body. What does that leave you with? Resurrection. Resurrection. He's gone. Why? Remember the phrase, why seek the living among the dead? Now, we need to know that too, because the next piece of the Christian story that is absolutely blow you away is that Easter, Resurrection Sunday, is about redemption. It takes a story of life, not a culture of death, not a culture of rules, but a culture of hope and truth that actually produces what we want for our lives, and that is we want to be redeemed. Because every one of us have done one thing. We've been a part of nailing Christ to that cross. We, too, participated in the death, crucifixion of Christ himself.
I mean, yeah, because ultimately he could have hopped off at any point, right? Like,
Yeah, totally.
Jolene brought that up in her communion meditation a couple of weeks ago. Of at any point he could have just said, "I'm done.
Yeah.
You guys can you deserve whatever you get from God. I'm leaving, right?
Well,
But
if you remember in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. I mean, he shows his human side where he says, I'm not really interested in this thing because
it's going to hurt.
Now, yeah, you got to remember this. We forget this. Christ saw crucifixions before he was crucified.
he knows how it goes. It
Yeah.
wasn't like a new technique they came up with on the spot.
They didn't do it for him.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're just, number 4,212,000, whatever that we did it to. Yeah.
right.
Anyway, so we get to redemption, and redemption is the story of Easter. Redemption is the beauty of that. And if we did want to say there's a harmony between the spiritual and the natural world, the beauty of it is that this all happens in Jerusalem over Passover. Now let's be reminded of what Passover was, is that the angel of death went over the camp in Egypt. And when they put the blood on the doorposts, the angel would pass over their lives and spare their children, right? So there's already a precursor to the notion of redemption, and that is it's blood that redeems you. And so when Jesus goes up on that cross, he's only carrying out, remember, we are Jewish Christians, okay? We are Judeo-Christian. We are rooted in the first half of the book, which then empowers and gives the story of the second half of the book, and that is we have a Passover lamb, a perfect Lamb of God, and then we read in Revelation, behold the Lamb of God, right?
Yeah.
It takes sacrifice to do that. And let's think about even our personal relationships. When something wrong happens, whether it's in our life, in our business, in a family, and whatever, someone has to pay the price to make it right. And then what happens is that situation or that person or that problem is redeemed. That's what the Christian celebration of Easter is. I'm redeemed. I deserve death. He beat death. I get redemption, which is why we don't have to walk around as though we're still in the grave and we're flogged and we're beaten on. We actually get to celebrate that. And when does that happen? Passover happens in the spring. When does the world come back to life? Whatever side of the hemisphere you're on is, whether it's spring in the southern hemisphere, spring in the northern, is the world is coming back to life.
Right.
Because God is a God of life. Without photosynthesis, guys, I mean, none of us ate today if there wasn't all these beautiful things called chlorophyll and all that kind of stuff that happened, right? Which is why we get all excited when it's a sunny 70-degree day in Idaho. And we're like, and all the California transplants are going, man, this is like February. I mean, right? And we're in April, right? They're all dying, seeing all the snow up on the hill there. So anyway, redemption's part of the story. Steve, what's your take on redemption there?
Yeah. I mean, it's what we see is the old dying and the new coming. Okay. In 1 Corinthians 15, just after what Pastor Doug talked about last week, or on Tuesday, I believe it was, it talks about the kernel goes into the ground and new life comes from that. The old must die and the new comes from that.
Yeah, because the kernel doesn't just pop up on its own and then it's just like suddenly a bigger kernel, right? Like it cracks open, it is broken.
Yeah, well, then it becomes like all dried, like good for nothing, right? It's done. Totally. And then you put it in the ground, comes back to life.
Right.
And this is so powerful, you guys. Think about this. That is what happens for wheat to germinate, for whatever it is, so that we eat. Our whole lives are dependent on that model. Wouldn't it make categorical sense that the God of order did the same with his son to bring us back to life?
Right.
We make it sound like it's this extra normal metaphysical story, and it is. But
it's based on something that it's a pattern he's already developed, right?
Nature resembles that.
Yeah.
Nature testifies. Remember, he said, if you don't worship me, the stones will cry out to me. Why is that? Because nature itself testifies that this is how God brings life to all of us. So that's why it's a celebration of redemption. There's another thing that's really important, okay, in that story, Christ defeats death. Because everybody... a little personal thought on mine in this is unless you deal with death, you really never ever get to living. Yeah, you have to come to terms with the fact you're a finite human being. Look at our world. It's so uber obsessed with how old are you and, well, what's your real true biological age and all these silly little things we come up to because we're trying to always cheat the number back, right? We're always trying to bring it back with whatever remedy and all those kinds of things that actually don't really happen, right? We always go, well, 40 is the new whatever. I don't even know the game. But you know what I'm saying, right? We're all trying to do that. Well, why is that? Because we're all faced with one reality. We will have a certain number of days and then it is over. So how do I make my days count before that happens? And then when it does happen, what happens next? What happens next? So listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It says, for Christ must reign until he humbles all his enemies beneath his feet. Okay. What's the true enemy that Christ is after? Was he after the Roman Empire? No, Stevie wasn't after the Roman Empire. Was he after tearing down the Jewish establishment? No, he wasn't after that. What he was after was, verse 26, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death. That's the enemy of all of us. Is it death? I mean, if someone dies tragically, no one's excited about that because it reminds us all of our frailty at every level. Christ comes along, does what the germed wheat does. It goes into the ground, dies, and then brings forward life. We get to come back and go, wait. You're saying there's hope? There's life after death? We were meant to live on, which is part of each of us as well, even though, when we're trying to cheat death and the 40 is the new whatever like that, is we're trying to say, I don't feel like I'm done yet. Ecclesiastes says this, God set eternity in our hearts. And if that's true, which we believe it is true, then the next part of it is, if he set us eternity in our hearts, why do we still die? Well, that's a tragedy, a sad repercussion of sin.
Yeah.
Sin. Okay, so all that laid out, Easter is what Easter is, resurrection is what resurrection is, because it does something to the great malady of all of our lives, which is it defeats death. It defeats death. And what I like about God, and I'm the math guy, right? I study math and I love mathematics, is what I love is that it's not a formula, but there is a God who put himself out there. Math is one of those beautiful things. Everybody's like, man, just tell me what the answer is. No, I mean, the beauty of math is you work your way through the problem and you deduce down and you go, that's the answer. And you hate it when that math teacher always looks at you and goes, okay, how did you get to the answer?
Show your work.
Yeah, show your work. And you're like, I don't want to show my work. I just want to, I got it right. Did I get it right?
Did I get it right or not?
Yeah, did I get it right or not? And the beauty of math is it's teaching you to think. Listen to this beautiful prophecy. This is from Psalm chapter 22. Guys, this is 800 years before crucifixion. Well, let me be a little more historically accurate. 700 some years before crucifixion was even developed in the known world. This verse is written. Listen to this verse. Tell me if this sounds like kind of a familiar event. Verse 14 of Psalm 22. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. Right? We talked about dislocated shoulders. My heart is like wax. Steve talks about the medical condition where the water and the blood come together. It is melted. My heart is melted within me. My strength is dried up. My tongue cleaves to my jaws. What did Jesus do on the cross, right? He asked someone to touch him with something so he could talk. And then it says, you lay me in the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. A band of evils have encompassed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. When a guy's hanging on that cross, remember, he dies of suffocation. What's the one thing you could see? All his ribs. You could see all of it, right? I mean, truly, when you're standing there and you're hanging there, they're counting all your ribs. They pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. And then here you have the Roman whole thing in, right? It says in the text, they divide my garments among them. For my clothing, they cast lots. 800 years before the death of Christ on a crucifix, it is prophesied that's how the Savior would die. It's in the book. So if you have any doubts about the resurrection this Sunday, if you have any doubts about the resurrection in your life, etc., what you got to remember is God set it up. He set himself up to fail by saying this is what's going to happen. And then it happened. And if you don't believe, then you have to ask yourself this question: how in the world do I get past the fact that it was said this would happen? It happened. Romans didn't have the body. Jews didn't have the body. The historians have brought it forward. The medical people brought it forward. The witness of Josephus. All these things come together and it says, yeah, we can't explain it. And then the Bible comes through and says he resurrected.
You have to have more faith to not believe the facts
100%.
Than to believe the facts and say we have evidence.
And if I could drop one last line, You have to have more faith to not believe. And then you still have to ask yourself this question: what do I believe? And what do I believe in? And what people the only thing you can really answer to is myself, my money, my looks, my government, the world around me. I got to tell you something. I'm going to put my hope in Christ, because those things, they all flitter. Mm-hmm. They do. I know my own frailty. You guys probably know your own frailty as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, pastors, for joining me in this Just Before Easter podcast. We are doing so many things here at Foothills over the next couple days. Tomorrow, Friday, is Good Friday. We're doing a combined Good Friday worship night over at Revive Church. So if you're here in the Valley, if you're local to Boise, come join us over at Revive at 6 p.m. We're going to have 5 other churches joining us, and it's going to be a very blessed evening. All the pastors are going to give some short messages, and we're going to have a lot of worship. Saturday, we are doing some family stuff here at the church. There's an egg hunt for the kids, and it's going to be a lot of community and time to just get together in preparation for the big day, which is Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. We're having 3 services at 9, 10, 15, and 11:30 here at Foothills, and we hope that you'll join us either online, but please come just join us on campus. Yeah. We want to see your face. We want to celebrate the resurrection of our Savior together in person if you can make it. So without anything else to say, we are so excited. Happy Easter, and we'll see you on Sunday here at Foothills Christian Church.